Hey everyone, I'm the Sega Scourge and welcome to another episode of Sonic What If, for the highly belated follow-up part to the AU that I still can't believe people like because most people really hate the ZIK. This is part 2 to What If Espio was trained by Master ZIK. Probably my most nuanced and dare I say creative what if to date. It's great to give both Espio and the ZIK some much needed love, and I'd like to say thank you for how open you all were to the concept and all the compliments on how part 1 was written. Last time we saw a fledgling Espio the Chameleon embark on a quest to seek out the legendary Lost Hex. In doing so, fate led him to meet with the wicked Master ZIK and his 5 powerful pupils. Through ZIK's manipulation and the strength demonstrated by Zavok, Espio gave in to his desires for self-improvement and began his training under the tutelage of the ZIK Guru, simultaneously vowing to not let himself be corrupted by their deep-seated evil. It's been 4 years since Espio arrived on the Hex, and in the last part we saw Hex Espio, the nickname given to him by my Discord server, struggle and suffer through a series of deadly trials, pitting him against all the Wonderworld had to offer. Meditation, martial arts, the monsters of the desert, and of course the ZIK themselves. In his penultimate test, Espio underwent trial by combat against his sworn rival, the mighty Zavok. But Espio came out on top, and consequently, Master ZIK demanded that the young reptile finish the job, in the hopes that his weak morality had cracked and withered after all these years. It had not. Just like his body, Espio's righteous soul was merely sharpened by the torment, and in a bold ethical act, he refused. He would not lead the ZIK, pledging to complete his training instead and allowing Zavok to claim leadership, which only fueled the bitterness welling up in the Red Demon's heart. The now inaugurated Espio stands aside these Oni as a fellow member of the Deadly Seven. His story continues today. Months have passed since the duel, and Espio has spent his weeks engrossed in combat practice, weapons training, image exercises, and any other miscellaneous tasks Master ZIK sets for him. However, Zavok, humiliated by his arch-nemesis, descended further into unrest, unable to stomach that this purple pupil bested him with only 4 years. The two have not spoken since, the muscle-bound miscreant hungry to somehow grow his power so he can enact his revenge. Currently though, Zavok is absent, carrying out some chore as instructed by Master ZIK. Not much is known, but apparently some mysterious invaders have shown up all across the Lost Hex, and Zavok has been tasked with hunting them down. He's been away for several days now. All the while, Espio patiently awaits his final test, and at long last, today's the day. Espio is led by a mildly disgruntled ZIK to the far corner of the Silent Forest, overlooking the sprawling plains of Windy Hill. His shuriken and his kunai are confiscated on the way, as ZIK bids he only need rely on his inherent fortitude and wit. ZIK has been racking his brain for where he went wrong during the chameleon's training. Where could he have possibly pushed harder or shown less mercy? The old man hasn't felt the sting of failure in centuries, and Espio can tell that it's playing on his mind. However, he doesn't question his sensei on the matter. He knows better than that. Soon, the elder comes to a stop and whips around to look up at his student.
Young reptile, as per your request, the Champion's Road has been prepared for you. It is the final segment of my training. All of my students have attempted it at least once. If you wish to call your time with us truly complete, then this course must be conquered in its entirety.
Master ZIK's conclusive trial is a Mushashugyo, a so-called Champion's Road. The trial is a pre-charted marathon across some of the most dangerous parts of the planetoid, a gauntlet of relentless bodily exertion. In all his time here, Espio hadn't ventured outside of the tropical beaches and the deserts for very long, only for the occasional errand and, of course, his duel months prior. Realizing this, he takes a quick glance at the breezy fields around him. Then, upon turning his head back to ZIK, his master has vanished into thin air once again. Where the ZIK stood lay a piece of parchment that Espio kneels down to unfurl, revealing it to be a map of the Hex, with a specific route marked out for him. Towards the corner of the chart is a table of requirements, a set of rules that the chameleon must note and abide by.
1. If you fall unconscious, the trial will conclude. 2. If you return to the dojo, the trial will conclude dishonorably. 3. If you rely on outside assistance, you must restart from the beginning. And 4. During your trial, you will be monitored.
Espio's eyes widen after reading that last line, looking over his shoulder before placing the unsettled feeling aside. With haste, he sets off down the mapped-out path, conserving his energy for what would surely be a long and arduous trial. Windy Hill is hardly a problem. Espio effortlessly navigates the floating landmasses with a sequence of nimble acrobatics, not unlike a certain blue hedgehog's parkour skills. But the chameleon is no mere freerunner, and it shows in the way that he makes use of his tail to hook onto objects and takes giant leaps between surfaces that no sane person would ever even attempt. Creativity and experience are on his side, and before long, Espio has reached the border to the desert ruins. Now's his time to shine. This is where he'll gain the most ground in the shortest period of time. Espio shoots off, rapidly accelerating to full speed over the sands, while, under the shade of a distant crumbling tower, Master ZIK watches his student streak across the Badlands. The foolish boy has done well so far, but this is only just the beginning. A cruel smirk forms on the Zeti's cyan face as a deep rumble echoes across the vast dunes. One of those hideous sandworms has just been alerted to Espio's movements. Without batting an eye, Espio flips and dodges the first bite as the worm bursts from the ground ahead. The ravenous monster thrashes in an attempt to catch its agile prey, but after being thrown into this death trap oh so many times, Espio is now in control. He locks his focus onto the maggot as it springs towards him like a train flying off of the rails. With but a hint of retribution, Espio summons all the strength that he's cultivated so far. He swings his fist and strikes the worm with a concussive punch, knocking it out cold and slamming it into the dust in one blow. But by no means is this the end of the battle. The worm's landing sends out a vibration which causes several more worms to emerge. Espio bolsters his might as the squirming throng charges towards him. Jump cut to an undisclosed amount of time later and we see a panting Espio standing atop a comatose sandworm, bruised but alive. All around the space lie the rest of the giant insects, each of them out like a light. Though he took a thrashing, Espio defeated each of the wretches with only his bare hands. The beasts that once haunted his nightmares, now battered and inanimate around him. Time passes, and after recuperating, Espio continues across the desolate wastes. As he moves deep in thought, he notices the sand around him start to change. What was once an arid heat becomes a piercing chill, the gold grit beneath his feet giving way to a fine, soft snow. The chameleon has arrived at the threshold to a frozen frontier, the next section of his pilgrimage. The sun has now dropped from its apex, signaling that he would slowly be losing daylight from here on out. Had the other students taken multiple days to finish their attempts at this trial? Had Zavok? He shook the distracting thoughts from his mind. It wouldn't do him any good to sit and stress over the details. He approaches some sort of wooden flagpole and fetches a scrap of brown tattered cloth swaying from it, wrapping it around his lower jaw and shoulders into a makeshift scarf. Despite expending a chunk of stamina prior, Espio again moves to quicken his pace. He races through a seemingly endless icy woodland, absorbed in concentration. His serrated focus is deviated, however, by the clicking sound of a buried pressure plate beneath his foot. Sets of spikes jet forth, arising in his path and all subsequent directions. The metal pikes activate a chain reaction of unseen mechanisms as flurries of arrows spate from indiscriminate angles, a cornucopia of concealed traps. Traps likely put in place by ZIK to further test the chameleon's instincts. The unfaltering Espio barrels forward, and with his methodical reflexes, he clears the no man's land in an instant. Now safe, Espio comes to a stop to reevaluate his path. During this intermission, he veers to the sound of rustling from a nearby bush. He clears his throat, recalling the rule sheet's line about being monitored. Could it be ZIK? No, his sensei would never be so sloppy. It's most likely just some small animal. Espio's repressed investigative tendency takes over as he slowly approaches the bushes, moving closer and closer as the scampering sound continues. Finally, he reaches both his hands in and pushes the shrubbery apart, as suddenly, something dives outwards in a startling fashion. Flying about the air is a tiny jade-colored creature. A baby ghost wisp, abandoned and on its own. That's right, wisps have made their home on the Lost Hex. Their appearance in this Espio What If means that we now know whereabouts this story takes place. Post-Sonic Colors. The events aboard the Interstellar Amusement Park have already transpired, and going by the official explanation, some wisps, rather than return home, decided to settle onto Sonic's world, explaining their minor role in later games. But among the new breeds of wisp introduced in Sonic Lost World, this one was not. This is a Jade Ghost Wisp from Team Sonic Racing, but not a fully developed one. An infant, mirroring the same design and cartoonish pacifier as the baby wisps seen in Sonic Runners. Espio is baffled. This creature is obviously not of this world or the world below. He's never seen or heard of anything like this before. While he stands inspecting the tentacled blob, he notes that its behavior seems to be the equivalent to that of a toddler, throwing a mid-air tantrum and letting out what he assumes to be angered bleeps. The gelatinous extraterrestrial seems totally untrusting of Espio for reasons unknown. Before the umbrella-shaped aphid can swoop away, Espio leaps upwards and gently catches hold of it. The wisp irately thrashes in his grasp before reluctantly subsiding into complacency on his open palms. Espio concludes that this creature must be one of the invaders that ZIK ordered Zavok to track down. This could also be the reason it's so hostile towards him, as the wisps are aware that the Zeti are looking for them. Espio wonders if there are more just like this one out there. If the Zeti discover this baby or any of the others, who knows what they'll do to them? Espio's eyes dart about, realizing that he's still being monitored on his trial, and ZIK must already know what these creatures look like. Thus, he opts to keep the infant hidden. He removes the brown rag from his neck and drapes it around the wisp, which proceeds to wriggle uncomfortably alongside garbled, agitated sounds. As he finishes concealing the baby, his heart rate surges to the sound of a snapping tree branch from nearby. The snap is followed by a shower of snow spilling from somewhere up in the trees. Espio tenses, fastening himself for whatever may happen. A blurred figure plunges from above and lands gracefully at ground level. It's not Master ZIK. It's the Deadly Seven's glamorous Zeena. Naturally, Espio is caught completely off balance, expecting his master to make the scene, not her, Zeena. What are you doing here?
ZIK put me on watch duty while he runs some errands. So stupid. Like, I've got better things to do than follow you around all day.
As she stated, ZIK has left Zeena in charge of Espio's supervision, and she's clearly not too happy about this. Allow me to explain. In the months since his duel with Zavok, Espio, as a constituent of the Deadly Seven, has chaperoned almost every one of the Zeti on solo missions, going with them on their many assignments at the behest of ZIK. Zeena, too, has worked alongside Espio, where he accompanied her to retrieve a rare venom from one of the Hex's many extraordinary creatures. Zeena's behavior towards the chameleon could easily be described as sardonic, taking every opportunity to get under his skin, reaping sadistic joy from the near-constant teasing, though Espio never once counters with hostility, instead responding with mild-mannered decorum. In spite of the obvious one-sided amusement, there seems to be more to it than just that. She doesn't go to such fundamentally malicious lengths with the other Zeti, often showcasing boredom, contrariety, and standoffishness while talking to them. Something about Espio's iron will and sickening sense of honor has incited a spark of depraved obsession in her, showering him with verbal abuse, inventing derogatory pet names, and watching for the cracks in his cool-as-ice composure. Their conflicting personalities have turned into her foremost method of killing time, but despite the mild entertainment value, Zeena still illustrates extreme loathing towards the straight-laced chameleon, regarding him as nothing more than a mummified misfit with archaic personal grooming habits. Having made her presence known, Zeena's attention turns to whatever it is that Espio's holding, the only reason she stepped out of hiding.
So, Scales, what's that you've got there?
It's nothing. Just some fruit, I gathered. Espio's stone-faced bluff is clear as crystal to Zeena, coupled with the fact that his fruit appears to be moving. She smugly paces towards him, prying for a little peek at this supposed fruit. Espio turns his back to Zeena, subtly clutching the wisp closer to his body as he attempts to garner some excuse not to expose what's inside the shawl. Zeena remains fervently persistent, suspecting that there's something that he doesn't want her to see. She soon gets her wish, as the baby jade wisp somehow manages to slip loose of its confinement, despite the fact that Espio had it bound tightly. Now hovering out in the open for all to see, Espio panics. Witnessing it, a perplexed Zeena soon pairs the non-indigenous critter with Zavok's search for supposed invaders, and quickly realizes what Espio is aiming to do by keeping it hidden from her. She smirks as the disaffectionate wisp flees into the woods, striving to get as far away from the troublesome pair as possible.
Just wait till ZIK finds out what you're up to. He's gonna be so mad. But if you ask nicely, maybe I'll just forget what I saw here. Well, if I feel like it.
The euphoric Zeena makes abundant nods to her newfound position of power, threatening to expose Espio's misconduct to ZIK, Zavok, and the others. But with his cover blown, Espio pays no mind to Zeena's attempts to perturb him, making it exuberantly clear that he won't abase himself before the Zeti. ZIK is his teacher. The student must obey the master. That is the creed Espio lives by. However, he's known full well that one day his clashing ethics will put him at odds with his sensei. One day he'd have to choose a side. If protecting the wisps becomes the root of his banishment, then so be it. Zeena, offended by his mute apathy, demands a response.
Hey, don't you ignore me. I swear I'll tell.
I don't have time for games, Zeena. Not today. Why don't you go and project your insecurities onto someone else?
Insecurities? What's that supposed to mean?
Surprisingly, Espio is firing back, but not the way Zeena wanted him to. Not with antagonism, instead with observational remarks on her character. I've seen you fight. Underneath all that makeup is actually a very capable warrior. But you'll never progress if you're a slave to that part of you that's missing. I can see why that hairstyle is so important to you.
What did you just say? How do you... Were you spying on me?
It seems that Espio has touched upon a very sore subject, referencing something that he may have seen when he worked with Zeena on one of ZIK's away missions. What that is remains uncertain at this time, but whatever it is, the very mention of it is enough to shatter Zeena's sarcasm and induce her terrifying temper. Humiliated, Zeena releases her unmitigated fury upon Espio, transitioning from an impartial overseer to a direct obstacle in his training course. She summons her innate powers as a liquescent green gleam envelops both her hands. Then, in an instant, Zeena swipes, the glows extending into neon cords which whip forward and ensnare the chameleon, binding his arms and constricting his chest. The tensile strength of the cables is startlingly substantial, tightening with enough force that they threaten to fracture his ribcage. This fight is meaningless. In a state of jeopardy, Espio can no longer afford to conserve his strength. With one sharp motion, he contracts his muscles, lifts his arms, and snaps the ropes from around him. The blazing strands recoil and dissipate as Zeena braces, anticipating some kind of retaliatory attack. However, this attack does not come. Instead, without a word, Espio begins to walk away. Without engaging her, he's just dealt a devastating blow to her ego, fracturing her once infallible superiority complex. When provoked, Zeena usually gets her way by force, but this time, her vain narcissism has been trampled without regard. Infuriated by this act of irreverence, Zeena launches herself towards Espio's blind spot, attempting one last bid to restore her dignity. She pirouettes and straightens her leg, delivering an earth-quaking kick to the side of Espio's face. But despite the destructive cheap shot, Espio stands firmly anchored, unharmed, as if the impact was swallowed up not by flesh, but by a steel girder. Espio could have evaded that strike with ease, but instead he's underlining the futility of challenging him. Realizing this, Zeena crumbles to the ground as Espio again makes his exit.
You think you're so great, don't you? Acting all sanctimonious when you beat Zavok, parading around like you're so above us all. It makes me sick. Why don't you just do us all a favor and just die already?
Espio comes to a standstill. He turns his head slightly to his rear. That kick wasn't half bad. If you shaped your skills like you shape your nails, you could be so much more. Think about what I said. Stop looking for what you're missing and start working with what you have. A broken mirror can never be made to shine. With those oddly constructive closing remarks, Espio takes off into the forest, silently cursing the time he'd wasted, but knowing that Zeena won't be following him from here on out. Espio does his best to track the infant, following in the last direction he saw it go. Just then, he overhears some commotion coming from a slightly more defoliated area just beyond the tree line. He sprints into the clearing, the origin of the racket, whereafter he bears witness to the baby wisp being besieged and harassed by a flurry of white-furred fauna native to this region. Yetis. Actually, Yeti, Zeti, maybe they're somehow related? Maybe, like distant cousins? I don't know. These wild egg-shaped vertebrates usually spend most of their time sleeping, turning aggressive if their slumber is disturbed. The baby must have somehow provoked them. Espio throws himself into the Yeti horde in an effort to defend the baby, delivering several fierce punches and sinking his fists into their corpulent bellies. However, despite the vigor of the blows, the burly beast's inflated hides repel the force of his attack, sending it back through his extremities. Espio again distributes numerous precision strikes, but again these impacts are nullified. With physical attacks proving insufficient, he grapples one of the abominable animals, employing another burst of endurance to lift it up, but notes a particular struggle in doing so. He quickly heaves it through the air, sending it on a collision course with the others like a big furry bowling ball. Espio catches hold of the baby once again, gently clasping it with both hands as it jerks about. He contemplates. However, his usually poised thoughts seem clouded and out of focus. He tries to high jump away, but he's unable to gain the height. He didn't feel so sapped earlier on, so what's happening now? Do these Yetis have some unseen power? Did Zeena do something to him? Has he been poisoned by something in the forest? It's not until his legs finally give out and his palm hits the snow that he realizes the cold. It's the cold. Espio's pride and confidence have caused him to overlook something so transparently obvious. He's not a thick-coated Yeti, and he's not a hyper-adaptive Zeti. He's a chameleon. He's climatized to the extreme heat of the desert, but these wintry conditions are detrimental to his health. He'd managed to keep his core raised with all the rushing around, coupled with the Zeena skirmish, but in the end it only slowed his exposure, and since he's been on the move without rest for nearly a full day, he's burning through the last of his stamina. And he was none the wiser to this. This is the fatal catch-22 of his training. Espio's years of meditation and physical torment have left him with a tremendous pain tolerance, virtually numb to any form of discomfort. While he can feel the cold, he can't feel the adverse effects it's having on his body, and with the sunlight gone, the temperature is plummeting to far below zero. As Espio comes to one knee, laboring, in a flash, two Yetis come stampeding toward him. They slam into him from both directions, sandwiching him between their blubbery midsections. The heavy hammering takes the wind out of the chameleon as he strains, trying to pry himself loose while also cushioning the baby wisp. More Yetis converge, cramming against one another like a woolly mosh pit as they try to ravenously reach the center. The weight and compression swiftly begins to crush Espio as he wrestles against fainting.
If you fall unconscious, the trial will conclude.
Those words echoed throughout Espio's mind and overthrew the possibility of surrender. Fighting the urge to succumb, Espio expends what could very well be the last of his strength to jimmy the Yetis apart, fashioning a few extra seconds of breathing room before they cascade on him once again. In that infinitesimal moment, the tormented Jade Wisp once again wriggles free from his clutch and flies off upwards, abandoning Espio and leaving him to his fate. Or so we think. The alien urchin falters. It turns mid-air and nosedives back towards the mass. Too juvenile to comprehend its actions, it plummets down and pounds headfirst into Espio's chest, disappearing into his body in an otherworldly flare. A viridescent light surrounds the chameleon as the Yetis dogpile him, but the creatures are too hysterical to realize that their prey is already gone. Through the Yeti's bodies comes a phantasmic spectre in Espio's likeness, a horned, jade-colored wraith with a serrated smile and eyes like a jack-o'-lantern, phasing in and out of the beasts like they're not even there. The baby wisp's determination has imbued the chameleon with hyper-go-on energy and activated the Jade Ghost Wisp color power. The Jade Wisp possesses the capability to turn its body intangible and pass right through solid objects like a ghost. This is how the infant managed to liberate itself from the cloth earlier, and now this unique ability is temporarily at Espio's command. The ethereal Espio moves unconsciously, escaping through the Yeti swarm and away. At breakneck velocity, he vaults past the woods, across the acres of snow, and all the way to the outskirts of the Arctic biome, as his color transformation comes to its abrupt end. The baby wisp is expelled from his body and hastily flies away as Espio, with nothing left to give, finally gives in to his affliction and collapses. The next morning in ZIK's tropical coast dojo, the Zeti pedagogue waits in the lobby, having come back from whatever business had kept him. After idling in languid silence for hours upon hours, the old sage's eyelids creak open. He waves his hand, turning the room's overhead gears and unsealing the main entryway. The large oriental doors move ajar, and then, ascending the balcony stairs comes a worn-out Espio. After pulling himself together, the chameleon not only managed to return here, but also hike along the rest of his course before journeying back to the temple. Espio knows that Zeena has likely reported his transgressions already, but his integrity and respect for his sensei have brought him back nonetheless. Espio proceeds inside, his legs still shuddering with residual atrophy. He bows to Master ZIK, ready to face whatever punishment lay in store for him.
So, you managed to make it back in one piece. Good, good. Well, Zeena, what's the verdict? How did our young reptile do?
What? ZIK's made no mention of his behavior or his efforts to protect the baby. What's going on? Is this some kind of trick? Amongst his nervous perplexity, Zeena, who'd arrived shortly before him, slinks out from the shadows.
Fine, I guess. Atrociously dull, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Espio is speechlessly flabbergasted. For no apparent reason, Zeena has chosen not to disclose his infractions. This is an extremely out-of-character act for a Zeti, especially one as conceited as her, and Espio just can't fathom it. He keeps his head down and remains silent as the discussion continues to unfold. But just then, in the thick of deliberation, a startling gatecrasher halts the conversation. It's the baby Jade Wisp. It's here, having glided through the wall and into the literal hornet's nest. It must have followed Espio all the way back here, yet his senses were too dulled to detect it. Zeena is shocked to see the little gnat once again, more so that it's doltishly unveiled itself to its predators. Master ZIK, in a mix of irritation and intrigue, forcibly confines the unknown intruder with his telekinetic powers and brings it in for closer examination. The tentacled mollusk writhes in anger as ZIK soon recognizes it as one of the invaders that he sent Zavok to find. Recognizing this fact, his clench grows stronger and his face gradually turns gnarled in disgust. "Master, wait!" Silence befalls the room. With the infant's life hanging in a perilous balance and feeling responsible for unwittingly leading it into danger, Espio is adamant to save it, but with his strength still in the process of recovery, he resorts to the most sensible tactic available to him. The same thing he tried with Zeena. Bluffing. "Master, I must confess, amid the trial I managed to circumvent Zeena's watch for a short time. During that point I discovered this creature. It may not look it, but this strange louse possesses an incredible power, and so I tamed it by force, and as a Zeti would, I took its power for my own." Espio furthers his ruse by explaining that he blacked out after employing said power to shave off time on his course and awoke shortly before Zeena caught up to him again. He clarifies that the creature reappeared on the way back to the dojo, and so he brought it here to report his findings. All the while, Zeena says nothing, displaying a total deadpan expression as Espio's elaborate lie continues. "I realize that I violated two of the trial's fundamental rules, relying on outside assistance and falling unconscious. I'm fully prepared to restart from the beginning. But as for this thing, these invaders on the Lost Hex, I believe that with enough coercion, these creatures could prove a valuable asset to us. If you'll permit me, I'd like to train this rabid mongrel so that I may further uncover its secrets. Espio is making a dicey attempt to secure the wisps and the baby's conservation by playing into ZIK's ambitions for him. There's no other choice here. This is far from what he wanted, but at the very least, it's better than their extermination.
Very well then. I'll allow it. Consider it your one and only allowance for the progress you've made thus far. That said, if it begins to interfere with your training, then mark my words, your pet will be put down.
Espio nods in acknowledgement as ZIK releases the wisp from his grasp and it skulks away to circle above Espio's head. The elderly Zeti then outlines a rescheduling of the young reptile's trial before leisurely strolling away, satisfied with today's developments. Espio breathes a much-needed sigh of relief. Somehow, he got away with that. He raises his head and beckons over the jade wisp up above. However, the baby's just as apprehensive as it was the day prior. And yet, despite the unfriendly behavior, it seems glued to Espio, accompanying him and moving aloft wherever he goes. Zeena, still stood watching on the sidelines, scowls and leisurely makes her exit. As she steps and passes by Espio, she sharply locks eyes with him, and with a sour sneer, she says,
"You owe me one, Scales. Don't you forget it."
Highlighting the debt to be paid, Zeena struts away. Espio is unfazed, however, and simply smiles with noble conviction before triumphantly heading out too, the baby jade wisp eagerly fluttering in the direction he's headed, keeping a safe but secure distance. Meanwhile, back in the grassy uplands of Windy Hill, we turn our attention to Zavok, the demonic ogre still in the midst of his master's assignment. Though his hunt has proved fruitless thus far, the fiend's expedition has led him to stumble across an invader unlike what he set out to find. A distinctive character, portly, mustached and draped in red attire. It's Dr. Eggman, alongside his robotic attendants Orbot and Qbot. First contact commences as Zavok declares his arrival, haughtily confronting the trespasser.
"Ah, you must be one of the fabled Zeti I've been looking for. Thank you for making my search all the more simple. You came here knowing what you'd find? You're either incredibly brave or laughably foolish. What name shall we put on your tombstone? I am Dr. Eggman, the most brilliant scientist in the world, and soon to be your new master."
Introductions come to a hurried close as within seconds, Eggman dispatches a swarm of laser-toting buzz bombers. That's when the Doctor first learns that a Zeti can't be subdued so easily. With a simple point of his fingers, Zavok displays the Zeti's innate ability to manipulate electromagnetic fields. He lines the aerial badniks up on his side, noting that it's been many years since he's had the opportunity to control someone else's machines. Dr. Eggman exhibits fascination at the phenomenon before suddenly he produces what looks like the outer casing to some unidentified crustacean, dark purple in color with barbed protrusions all over it. Shock and alarm comes to Zavok. He knows exactly what that object is. It's a cacophonic conch. The Doctor heaves and empties his lungs into the thin end of the shell, blowing profusely as the inner cavities of the carapace give off a red hue in conjunction with a low-pitched noise. The cacophonic conch is the natural inhibitor to Zeti powers. To anyone else, the sound is harmless, but to a Zeti, it causes sensory turmoil and excruciating pain. In spite of Zavok's attempts to defy his suffering, before long the brute relents, grasping his head, brought to his knees by the dulcet tones and surrendering to Eggman's will.
"Now then, whatever your name is." "Zavok." "Yeah, sure, whatever." "For my plans to succeed, I need an army. You and the other Zeti are going to help me build it. So, go and round up the others. You've got a lot of work to do."
And that's where we're gonna end this story for right now. So, what did you guys think? How do you think Espio fared on his Challenger's Road? What did you think about the narrative between him and Zeena? How about the adorable baby Jade Wisp? Do you have any name ideas for it? And of course, now that Dr. Eggman has arrived to enslave the Zeti, what are your projections on the events of Lost World in Part 3? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments below. And since this is the last What If video before the new year, happy holidays everyone, and I'll see you guys in 2021 for the return of Sonic What If. Take care.